How can a government be so wicked, so discriminatory to its own citizens? How can those sworn to protect instead become executioners in silence? Imagine walking into a clinic thinking you're being healed, only to discover decades later you were never a patient, you were an experiment. Imagine this. A man walks into a clinic. He believes the government is helping him. He believes he's being treated. He trusts the doctors in their white coats, the clipboards, the kind words. But what he doesn't know is this. He's not a patient. He's a subject. His pain is not being healed. It's being studied. His life is not being saved. It's being sacrificed. And when he dies, his body will be dissected, not for justice, not for truth, but for data. This isn't a nightmare from Nazi Germany. This isn't a horror story from some faraway land. This happened in America. This was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Welcome to Dreaded. If you're new here, subscribe now, because today we uncover one of the darkest and most shameful chapters in U.S. history, when doctors, backed by the government, condemned hundreds of black men to slow, agonizing deaths in the name of science. The year was 1932. The Great Depression had crippled America. Jobs were gone, families starved. For black communities in the South, life was even harder. In Macon County, Alabama, the town of Tuskegee was poor, deeply segregated, and mostly black. Healthcare was nearly impossible to afford. For many, the only hope of seeing a doctor was through government charity programs. And into this poverty stepped the United States Public Health Service. They came promising care. They came promising treatment. But what they offered was not healing. It was betrayal. The U.S. Public Health Service, led by Dr. Talia Farrow Clark, wanted to study syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that, left untreated, eats away at the body. It can rot the brain, destroy the heart, cripple the nervous system. It was deadly, cruel, and common. Clark and his colleagues wanted to observe the natural progression of the disease in black men. Not to cure it, not to treat it, to watch it, like one might watch lab rats. So they recruited 600 black men. 399 had syphilis. 201 did not. These men were mostly poor sharecroppers, uneducated, desperate for care. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a local term that covered everything from anemia to fatigue. They weren't told they had syphilis. They weren't told the risks. They weren't told the truth. Instead, they were given free meals, free transportation, free medical exams. To men with nothing, this seemed like a blessing. In reality, it was a death sentence. For decades, these men were misled. They were given placebos, aspirin, mineral supplements, tonics. Not penicillin, not real treatment. Because when penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis in the 1940s, a miracle drug that could have saved them, the doctors refused to give it. In fact, they went out of their way to stop the men from getting it. When World War II broke out, some of the participants registered for the draft. The military doctors discovered they had syphilis and ordered them to be treated. But the Public Health Service intervened, blocking treatment to keep the experiment going. These men who were willing to serve their country were instead betrayed by it. The study dragged on for 40 years. 40 years of lies. 40 years of men growing sicker, going blind, insane, crippled. 40 years of wives infected by husbands who never knew the truth. 40 years of funerals. By the 1960s, younger doctors and scientists began to question the ethics. One whistleblower, Peter Buxton, a public health service investigator, raised alarms. He wrote memos, begged superiors to stop the study. They ignored him. In their eyes, the data was too valuable. The experiment was too important. The men's lives were expendable. So Buxton went to the press, and in July 1972, the Associated Press broke the story. The headlines shocked the nation. Syphilis victims in U.S. study went untreated for 40 years. Outrage exploded. Congressional hearings were held. The experiment was shut down. By then, it was too late. Dozens had already died. Many more were permanently disabled. Wives infected, children doomed, an entire community scarred. And the government, when exposed, scrambled to cover itself in shameful apologies. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed. Survivors and families eventually won a $10 million settlement, but no prison sentences, no real accountability. The doctors who orchestrated this crime lived out their lives in comfort. It wasn't until 1997, 62 years after the experiment began, that President Bill Clinton stood before survivors and offered an official apology on behalf of the U.S. government. He said, "The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong." By then, only a few survivors were left to hear those words. Old men, broken in body, but unbroken in dignity. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment is more than just history. It's a mirror. It shows us what happens when science loses humanity, when doctors forget their oath, when governments treat citizens as disposable. It is a story about racism, about class, about power. It is proof that cruelty doesn't always wear the mask of violence. Sometimes it wears a white coat. Sometimes it carries a clipboard. Sometimes it smiles while it kills. And here is the bitter truth. Tuskegee is not an isolated horror. It echoes in every marginalized community that has been exploited, abandoned, lied to. It echoes in the distrust many still feel toward medicine today. And can you blame them? When history tells you that your life was once an experiment, how can you believe it's different now? You've been watching Dreaded. Remember, history doesn't only live in books. It lives in scars. And the scars of Tuskegee remind us of what happens when power goes unchecked. If this story made you think, if it made you angry, subscribe now, because the stories they want forgotten, we will never let die.